Always waiting for LinkedIn.
I never know what's happening on the back end, so I just like
Yes, sorry. Okay.
sitting here.
It's kicked off and looks like LinkedIn is loading in now. Always waiting for LinkedIn. Yep, you can hear my echo. Okay, we're live. Go ahead and start.
Awesome. Welcome to the agency hot seat.
Yes.
Today I let me introduce myself, Meredith Pickerel. I am a senior controller here at Upsourced. I've been here for a little over 5 years, work with digital and creative agencies every day. Normally I am joined by Ryan Watson, one of the founding partners, but we kicked him off for a girls' chat today. So joining me is Rachel from Louder Than 10. And Rachel, I'll go ahead and um, kick it over to you to introduce yourself.
Excellent. It's really nice to see you again, and I'm really glad to be on the show. I really appreciate it. So I'm Rachel Gertz. I'm the Director of Delivery and Growth at Louder Than 10. And Louder Than 10 is here to help project managers and anyone who kind of wears the project hat, so they come with multiple titles, including account managers, manage more efficient projects that just feel easier, that just feel like agencies that run them are getting high value, good quality relationships that can just repeat, rinse and repeat. So that's why I'm here. And I love the work that I do. I've been running Louder Than 10 for 15 years now, actually over 15 years. And I'm just really excited to work with agencies of all shapes and sizes and the folks that do the good work.
Awesome. Well, we appreciate you being here. Caroline, should we dive into it?
Yes, absolutely. So our first question that we had come up was, when should scope be decided on a project? And just to let you guys know, if you're here on the live stream, feel free to drop your questions in the chat and we'll add them to the queue.
Awesome.
Excellent. So Meredith, do you have any initial thoughts on this from your end before I dive in? Because I have a whole bunch of thoughts.
Let's hear your thought. I'm here to hear all of your thoughts and knowledge
okay.
today yes.
Okay, so I don't know if you experience this. This is what we classically experience when we're talking with a lot of digital agencies. So oftentimes they'll come to us and they'll be like, like we constantly have this issue where what we sold and what we deliver don't line up. And it usually involves just not understanding enough of the scope at the beginning of the project. You do not know what you do not know because you have not had enough conversations. And what often happens is agencies will cement that scope in a statement of work immediately following one or two conversations, maybe 3 or 4 conversations. And it's usually one person. Maybe the one person is the owner or a director of sales, or it could be potentially some sort of subject matter expert, depending on how many hats they wear. They go in, they ask a good slew of questions, and then they go and they try and okay, I've defined the technical requirements on this project, but they've talked to one stakeholder. That one stakeholder may or may not even be the person leading the project, right?
Yeah.
That person may or may not even be the person that gets the ultimate say in whether that project is a kill or not, and if it will still be around. So what we see time and time again, and I want to hear all about what you see, is that people try to sign off on scope way too fast.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Nope. We see that happening a lot. And then you have to figure out how to either go back later and ask for additional, once you realize it goes out of scope, go request more an increase. Or what often happens is we just have a really low margin, and at the end of the project it's like, oh well, here we are. Like, yeah, the project margin's bad because it was different than what we sold the work for.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So if the goal target, if we're trying to get to 60 to 70% project margin to try to create that 25 to 30%, net margin, which is not what is average in the industry, 15 to 17% right now. I don't even know if it's gone down in the last year. What do you
Yeah,
think?
the last couple of years it's been, I would say, like most of our portfolio is falling somewhere around 10%-ish.
Yeah. So there we go,
Which is
right?
down. Which we want to
And
be
so
at 25%. It's just
yeah.
20,
And so
25.
where are those losses? Where are you seeing the losses coming from? Because I want to see how much of that is tied to scope versus tied to other things, like people unexpectedly going on holidays or things like that.
Yeah, I mean it's such a mix and you have to like really dive in to figure out where those losses are coming from. Is it you don't have you're over servicing clients, you don't have
Yeah.
enough revenue to support the team, so your team's not fully utilized. So definitely a mixed bag from what we see.
That makes sense completely. Yeah. So what we're trying to teach and train folks up on is the idea that what your clients are looking for in that initial sales cycle is not actually the exact, I know this is going to sound counterintuitive, not exactly the number that they need to pay to sign off on the contract, but they want to know the value that they're going to be getting. The best way you can create that clarity is by sharing similar types of projects with similar types of scopes with the ranges that were assigned to those projects based on what you understand, because this is a brand new project. You have never done this project, even if you've done a project like this 1,000 times. It will have new technical requirements. Technology is changing every day. AI is doing stuff today that it wasn't doing yesterday, right?
Yeah.
So, first of all, that comparison is like so key. And then when it comes down to, well, like, let's map what the features are going to be and where those sit. If you're trying to do that in a sales process, you're giving away your IP, your strategy for
Yeah.
how you're going to solve the problem, right? So it just doesn't line up with the sales to delivery cycle. You're going to have a breakdown.
Yep. Yep. No, that totally makes sense. And we see it play out in real time every day.
Yeah. So I don't know. What do you have like ways of advising your clients, Meredith, when you see that stuff happening? Like, I'd love to have a conversation.
Yeah, so we more find it on the we try to be as prospective as possible, but a lot of times in accounting and finance you're looking at it in a retroactive way. So we're seeing it when projects are not necessarily the scoping piece, it's more of like as projects are going, as we start to fall outside of the project budget, and we're looking at project margins in at least on a monthly basis in more real time and trying to show like give that visibility to the PMs, but it's ultimately up to like the PMs to manage that work and make
Right.
sure that it's in scope. So we do less of like, here's what your proposal should look like, and more of the analyzing the data once that's starting to
Once
come.
it's done. I totally get it, right? So that's like retroactively, it's so valuable because you're able to learn what the breakdowns are. And so then our side of it is like, what do we do about that so that we can get in front of it for the next one?
Yeah.
So, right. So we have like sales trying to sell something they literally are just getting familiar with. And then they kind of pass over the documentation, like whatever this is with like a service level agreement plus the statement of work, and they package it up. Maybe they'll have subject matter experts reviewing it or an account director reviewing it, hopefully,
Yep.
right? And
Yep.
project managers hopefully being brought in. And I'd say they should be brought in after that first sales call just to do a risk assessment, to discuss resourcing and scheduling, discuss high level requirements, even just from like oh, it sounds like they want this, right? But that handover process, they basically will kind of like sell project A, hand it over to the project management team, and then the project management team is sort of like boxed in to deliver something that when they start discovering, doing the
Right.
research and discovery, it like doesn't even match what was initially sold. It's like, well, that's not even the problem. And
Right.
so I find like what happens is that people are diving in, like there's that the double diamond approach, right? Where you start by focusing on determining what are all the problems that you're trying to solve before then honing in on and prioritizing the few that you're going to solve, at which point you can then start transitioning into solution mode. And that second side of the diamond is like which solution will be the best, and then narrow that down and go for that. So I see people in sales jumping to the second side of the diamond before they even know what the freaking first part of the diamond is. And
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you're seeing that too.
Yeah, and it shows up a lot again once it's like once you're in the weeds of the project and they're trying to manage it, that is showing up in the margin. So what is from your perspective, like what are some of the solves for that? Like
Yeah,
what,
like how do we fix this, right?
yeah.
Okay, so I mentioned this earlier, but I do think that first of all, somebody who is managing the project or is accountable for project success should be brought in after the first sales call to do a light risk assessment, evaluate resourcing, evaluate the schedule, evaluate capacity, and just evaluate overall alignment. This is an opportunity to like check your vetting criteria and actually just see if it's lining up. We have this like client alignment matrix, and we'll do this. I don't know if you were there for one of those sessions that we did, Meredith, but making sure that folks are like aligned in quadrants so that you can see, oh, when we sold the project, it was like a perfect fit client. But then when we delivered it, it moved into like, don't even think about it. And from a values and alignment perspective. So having those regular conversations is always going to allow you to keep on top of like, is this the type of client that we want? Is this the type of project that we want? So that's what I'd say first. I don't know how you feel about like PMs coming in after the first meeting. Right?
No, I'm like, we need their buy-in. They're going to be the ones managing it. So yeah, no,
they have to clean it up. So they have to be empowered to be able to do that. Yeah. And then from there, usually what I'll suggest too, and like this is nothing new, but I still find it amazing that there's a lot of agencies that still are not doing separate paid phases for the discovery and the research so that you can actually assess the problem solution space, right? It's minimum 10% of your total project value should be allocated to discovering what the problem and solutions approach should be. But even still, like I'm seeing, and like highly, like what we'll do is we'll train up the PM, and then we'll ask the PM, like, bring this back to your team, or we'll do like a group training and be like, okay, look at your statement of work and look at what are you promising and what language is like unclear, right? So we've got clarity in the language, and then we've got unclear language. Let's fix that. And then we'll actually talk about like, what are you promising in a statement of work in terms of the specificity around those features? And so instead of getting into, we'll be doing this feature, this feature, this feature, this feature, what we should start doing is we should start prioritizing and looking at, we will tackle this issue first, and then we will tackle this issue second. And that's stuff that you can massage so that when you're timing and budgeting for the amount, you're actually starting to get more of like a cadence. So maybe it's like a monthly amount, and you're thinking, okay, min this number of people, max that number of people, min this amount of time, max that amount of time, based on the high level understanding of like, are we talking about a platform? Are we talking about, you know, like a marketing campaign or ongoing recurring revenue? And then you can start saying like, okay, this will be min to max range, or a monthly amount with the estimate of between this many to this many months. It's still a range essentially. But the flexibility then gives you and the client the keys back, right? Because you can then work together on saying, well, if your budget is this, then that means we have to prioritize ABC instead of C, right?
It just empowers your team to be like, okay, we aligned at the beginning. Here's our priority list, and if we're running out of budget and scope, like priority 3 or 4, well, then we either have to decide we're going to do this, and then we're going to increase scope, or we're not going to do this. And it's black and white. Yeah.
And it can be ongoing. It's not like you have one conversation and then you're done. It's like, okay, that was great. We'll never do it again. Because it is always changing. And like, there's different ways of approaching delivery where sometimes you might take on, for example, the highest risk features first, because you're actually trying to tackle the risk to get an idea of where the budget needs to go. In other cases, you actually might tackle low-hanging fruit, and you might get your MVP sorted so that you're focusing on just getting it to market. And it will depend. I always highlight this, but I find it ridiculous that when people are starting new projects, when agencies are starting new projects, clients are not being asked both project level goals and business goals. They're just getting asked project goals. So you're like, okay, great. We're gonna set success criteria for the project, if people even do that. Then if it's like, okay, but the business actually wants to grow or like acquire or to like change a service offer, you don't know that, like, you're building the wrong thing, right? Exactly. So how can your PMs be successful? How can your delivery team be successful if that's the case?
Yeah. No, that makes a ton of sense. Okay, Caroline, next question.
Yes, so this one just hit my inbox. We've got, what are time tracking best practices for PMs? There's a lot of context switching, and it feels like a lot of effort to track time towards each specific client.
Yes. Oh man. Okay, this is
we get that all the time.
Okay. All the time. I have a very unconventional, we have an unconventional approach to time tracking. It does align more with values-based billing, because what I understand is this. time tracking is about data collection, data review, and then taking the data and doing something with it so that you can make improvements to your system. I think the folks at Parakeeto talk about this in terms of a flywheel. You're setting and looking at a data so that you can make revisions and always make improvements and continuously improve. So my personal take on this is, if you are setting reasonable revenue targets monthly, quarterly, annually, if you are good at expressing and clarifying why those targets exist and how each member is contributing to those targets, and you're setting your rates and your capacity on a predictable level. So like, for example, instead of just being like, oh, I don't know how much work is in the pipeline, you're going to be managing 6 projects this month, but only 2 next month. We get into this idea of like, no, we're only going to max out at 4. We will never be running more than 4, because it actually will prevent us from providing the most value. It will delay our starts and stops. It will lower our efficiency if we start putting more of that in. There's always situations where you're like, oh shoot, revenue went down, we need to pick up a project. There will always be situations like that. However, getting into a cadence and a time blocking approach is going to eliminate the majority of the stress that time tracking causes. Because what I see happening, and I do think it's valuable when you're using the data and learning and like baselining, and then like using that to map profitability. I do think that's important. But you can also zoom out on those targets and get like daily targets or like weekly targets, monthly targets for like capacity, utilization. There's so much like fraught history with utilization. It's based on a scientific method where it's like folks who were working faster in this, like folks who were enslaved who were working faster, they would be rewarded, and folks who were not would be punished, like literally physically punished, right? So there's a lot of history on that. And for us, we look at it as like, how do we decouple time and labor in a way that still gives us valuable data about what we're doing and where we should spend our time without punishing the agency for charging hourly rates, because you do something faster, you shouldn't get paid less. Be the worker who is like, I shouldn't be punished for doing something faster if I actually provide the skills and experience that I've been honing. So that's a little, sorry that I'm talking a lot because I get very passionate about that.
I appreciate the perspective. Yeah, no, I have lots of feelings on
I know, I want to hear. I want to hear about yours, and then I want to come full circle. So
I totally agree with you. I want to circle back to a point that you made. Like, in general, is your stance that no PM should have more than 4 projects that they're managing at a time?
I think, okay, so this will depend. This will depend on what size and shape are your projects, right? And how big. Like in general, are you running several smaller campaign-based projects, or are you running mega projects that are like huge builds that will take over 2 years? So that's gonna have a big impact.
Yeah.
But one, like, the other thing to think about is you always have internal projects too, and we don't budget time, we don't budget capacity for those, and they always get left to the wayside because they're not billable work, right? And it's like, you still need to do that stuff. So it is a very loose rule, where if you look at time blocking from simply a Monday to Friday perspective, you have AM blocks and PM blocks, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. All in all, that adds up to 10 blocks of time. Each block is about 10% of that time. When you look at like project management and allocating for project management, usually a project requires 20% of the budget to be allocated towards project management. So it actually ends up working out if you split it all up. If I had a visual for you, I could actually show you this, but like Monday through Friday, you can allocate approximately like 4 projects comfortably. Then you have a little bit of buffer and you have time for learning, growth, internal check-ins, billable hours are still covered. And you can still make room for like the salt and pepper stuff that comes in that you have to do, and the surprises. Yeah. So it's not like I'm going to say, no, you can never run 5 or 6. Yes, you can, but maybe then have a cadence where week 1 you're working on 3 projects and week 2 you're working on 3 different projects, and you're not near the 2 shall cross over, because you can actually arrange handovers better that way. So that's my take. What's your take?
No, I mean, I don't have a specific, like, here's the number of projects. I think in practicality, what I see as hard is when they're small projects.
Yes.
And so you still have the context switching that you would have if you were running, $1 million projects, but we're running $50,000 projects. And so you can't just flip a switch and overnight grow that project size. And over the last couple of years, it's like, we're going to go out and sell what we can sell because we need the work coming in. So like, there's like an ideal state and there's the reality, and it's matching up like, okay, where are we headed? I think tracking all of this is super important. And okay, here's our North Star and where we want to be, but like, let's step back and like where we actually are.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. I think I had genuine concern for the industry because of the fact that commoditization is happening in such an extreme way. It is kind of forcing the hand of folks to have to be more efficient. Like you have two options. You make more money or you save more money. Those are your options, your levers and your dials, right? So if you can't make more money because you're in an economic climate where costs are coming down and the competition is getting more and more fierce, and you're not able to charge your minimum rates, because like I am a strong proponent of agencies should have and know what their minimum rates are based on the size they want to be, the shape they take, how much holiday time they want, what they want people to be paid. They should have a minimum engagement fee for that. And I also recognize the reality of the situation is that people are losing out on bids to shops that are like, well, I can do that at 30% lower because I have overseas labor. So there is a reality piece to this. And I think that it's going to get interesting. I'm not saying, I don't want to be like a doomsayer or anything in this regard. You're going to see changes to the agency landscape because I think they're going to have to either get much, much smaller or much, much bigger. And the middle-sized agencies, mid-sized agencies out there are struggling because the overhead is so high because of management layers they need, and because they're still trying to kind of compete with the same agencies that are much smaller, they're working with the same clients in that same middle range. They're not quite enterprise, or maybe just barely, where procurement is not causing them to like have massive issues, right, and delays with like one year contract closing, but they're fighting in the same area. And I think that that's where decisions will have to get made. And that's a really tricky, that is not what I would have said maybe like a year ago, but I am seeing like changes to the industry that I think are irreversible. I don't see business as usual anymore. And I don't know, Meredith, how you're seeing what you're seeing out there.
I mean, similar, it's stabilized a little bit in the last, like, this last quarter was better. But it's still hard. Like people are fighting for every dollar that they're bringing in and selling. It's by no means like it was in 21 and 22.
No, I know.
Like,
and it won't be, I don't think, ever again, right?
I don't think so either.
Yeah.
Okay, Caroline, what other questions do we have? Sorry, we went on a little tangent.
Sorry, I know. And I did want to come back to the time tracking one because I have a follow-up to that for like use cases and stuff too, but.
Awesome. So our next question that we had is, what are you guys noticing in the agency world, like regarding trends for client spend and project size and close rates right now?
Yeah, well, I want to ask you first, Meredith, because I have a different, like, my perspective and your perspective might be slightly different on that.
Yeah, I don't know I can't tell you like the percentage of close rates right now. Sorry, Caroline, can you repeat the first part of the question?
Yeah, what trends are you seeing for client spend and project size? And then regarding like close rates right now as well was the second part.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of similar to the conversation that we were just having. Like everything is coming, it's coming down. It's very competitive. Their budgets are not the same as they have been. And it's also like very industry specific too. It's like I've got some people in like the agriculture space or the not-for-profit space, and like they're just impacted a lot differently than like the large enterprise clients. Our clients that serve large enterprise clients have seen that like that the decline in sales, but like the clients that are serving some like the mid-market, it's just a different it's a different environment.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm kind of curious about that too, in terms of like what is fueling that the most. Like I think about where dollars are getting spent, and like so if you think about like web, like let's say for the industries you serve, web design, design projects, development projects, SaaS project platforms, service design, all of these things, branding, social media, blah blah blah, blah, all of these areas, e-commerce. They're usually coming out, like oftentimes they're coming out of this tiny chunk of budget for OpEx, for operating expenses for the clients, right? The clients are allocating these budgets, and their allocations are going to be based on their own projections, and all of that is like, it's like a fraction of a fraction, right? We're coming, like these budgets are coming out like that, and I'm thinking like during times like this, like economic times, we've got elections coming up in North America and Canada as well coming up. I've heard like Europe is more interestingly, like the market is stabilized a little faster, but I'm super curious, like if the kind of the conservative like approach to project closes is like, we're waiting on, if they like, if they're waiting on something, if they're like, okay, well, we think that once we know who's going to be in government, or once we know, like I'm wondering what the pieces is that the like really holding folks back from being able to like close those dollars, or if it's just competition and like trying to do things in-house faster. That's also another thing that I'm seeing too.
Yeah. I hear that sentiment. I've thought that earlier this year, and now I think it's kind of just settled in that this is the new norm. I don't know. I guess time will tell. We can look back in January or February and be like, oh yeah, that was exactly what caused it.
That's what happened. I've heard like folks who are doing augmenting of teams, like they're, like they'll actually have their full team, that they'll pop the team into a larger enterprise level companies that maybe just they don't know how to run teams like that. They seem to be doing quite well with recurring revenue. That's what I'm hearing anyway. So especially if it is like e-commerce, or if it's like, more technical builds, things like that, where they just need ongoing support for like new and developing product lines and areas and service areas. So that I'm really curious about that. I wish, I don't know where you get your sources from, but like I know I have a few that I'm kind of relying on for that stuff. So
yeah, I'll be interested to see also, like, I think what is going to start to happen is like all of these big companies brought teams, in 21, 22, they started massively like hiring people, and now it's kind of going the other direction. Well, will that be part of like the creative marketing team? Will those start to shrink? And then suddenly we need agencies again, like this, the life cycle of agencies where it's like, okay, we realize how much we're spending, so let's bring it all in house. And then we're like, let's cut that because we don't need it. And then it's like, oh, now we need a brand campaign or a website. Let's hire our agency again. So I think we'll see that in years to come as well.
I think so.
Probably happened.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that I don't think agencies are going away. I think it's just changing. And I think that agencies have to be a lot more aware that like what their role is not creating deliverables. It's not creating the thing at the end of the, at the end of the project. It's like it's this ongoing value delivery cycle. And I talk about this all the time because oftentimes like project managers are left out of the conversation around value creation because they're like, well, that's account management, it's not my job. But your job is efficiency in the process. So part of that is to know, while you're building the thing that is going to help them generate revenue, ideally, how are you going to do that in a way that helps you generate revenue? Right. That's just something that like I believe all PMs need to be wearing that hat and thinking about the sales lens, because they have so much power to do that, especially when there's not dual roles in a company where they have an AM and a PM.
That I have two questions or comments. That is a thing that has been coming up. It's like whenever something happens 3 times in 1 week, I'm like, oh, this is a topic or a problem. And this is a conversation that I kept having the last couple of weeks, where it's like, can your AM and your PM wear the same hat? Are they thinking in 2 different ways? And then so that's a question. And then the second piece is like the winners and losers of our losers isn't the right word. Like the clients that have had more success this year have been the ones that have leaned into their account teams to be like, you need to grow our organic, like you are tasked with growing that organic growth and finding more revenue from like the sales team will go out and find the new work, but you need to grow that existing revenue. And like when you have that buy-in from the team, that's where we start to see
Yeah,
success.
because so if your team is responsible for creating the work that actually provides this value that creates the chain, like they're going to, if they are primed and have the mental capacity, because they're not running 6 projects, they're running 3 or 4 projects, to think about, oh, actually, let's plan for some road mapping for the next quarter, because I actually see 3 different opportunities here. And so the PM or the AM, or whoever's involved, can surface that, and they can totally, it doesn't have to be in opposition. Like, everyone talks about this like healthy tension between AMs and PMs. I don't even like, it can be tension, but it can also just be like a tango. Like, you've got sales as the left foot, right? Sales or AM left foot, their job, bring in profitable work. PM's job, delivery team's work, keep it profitable, right? Right foot, left foot, you need them both. You have to tango. So I see it as like this incredibly valuable opportunity. I don't think it has to be as contentious or like difficult. It can be done with ease. And the team and the PM and this AM or salesperson, like, they can all work together going in the same direction. It doesn't have to be this friction. It's just knowing what, like for example, I don't think the average anybody knows what the impact of discounting is. The loss of your actual scope in the project when you discount a 10%, right? Because it's like, yeah, 10% of the total project, but of that, how much of that is going to be cut into the labor that has to actually make the stuff that you promise? So now that percentage of your chunk of time and money available has gone down much more than just the overall project getting a 10% cut. So it's eating your margins like a lot more than you think. You have to do way more with way less.
Yeah. Yeah. What are your thoughts on the same person wearing those 2 different hats, the AM and the PM?
I have seen it, honestly, like, I don't know, I'd be bragging a little bit, but I think like the folks that go through our training, the way that they're encouraged to use the ability to think big and little at the same time, like look and zoom out, then go back in and actually get into the weeds. It's not everybody, not everyone can do this, but I think that PMs can make great AMs. I think a lot of them, because they're relationship focused, and they should be, they're not task jockeys. They're not like, just like, oh yeah, I gotta get from A to B. I find that actually usually means that you're going to be missing really important risk related conversations if you don't have someone that's really keyed into like relationships, communication, like risk and things like that. I think that yes, the PM can wear the AM hat. I do see some challenges with AMs that they're like, no, I don't want to know what those details are. It's overwhelming. It's not important. I don't want to focus on it. I just want to focus on relationships. They're not on the execution side. So I see it easier for many folks to train a PM up in AM than to train an AM up in PM, but not impossible. It just has to be like, let's slow down. Let's get more focused on your area of expertise. And let's look at the big picture about like, not just the why you need to do these things, but like, what is the most effective way to capture it that doesn't require, I find like over processing, like when you just apply process for the sake of it, it's like, well, of course it's going to feel gross and it's not going to work. Right? Yeah. It's just, that's not how we do. You don't need to do that.
Yeah. So
to your point.
I think that's helpful. Anyway, again, we diverge there from the question, but
that's important stuff. So
yeah, no, all good. Caroline, what else do we have? Any?
Okay, so now that we're in Q4, what's the one thing you think my agency should focus on to grow my agency and set myself up for success in Q1 of 2025? So I guess like,
holy smokes.
I know it's a very loaded question.
I don't know who you are, but I am dying to help. Yeah. Okay, so you're at the end of, you've got 3 months left, and then you've got basically a whole year's worth of planning. So without trying to answer that question without knowing anything about where it's coming from or who's asking it, you are looking at for Q1, 2, and 3, where did you actually end up? Because we make a whole bunch of plans at the beginning of the year. By Q3, we're like, oh, yeah, we didn't meet any of those plans. So the first thing that I'd be doing is scaling back on the number of goals and OKRs that you actually create, because you're probably not achieving them. Or if you are, you're amazing and I want to talk to you. So you're going to be looking at where did you land, right, in Q3, so that when you're like queuing up for Q4 and the whole next year, it should be prioritizing. Like do like a service analysis. So take a look at your top services, order them in terms of like, where did you actually have the highest profit margins? Where did you have the most efficiency? Where did you actually have the highest happiness too, from the team or from the clients? Because those are things that you want to likely repeat, right? So do a service audit, probably do a light process audit to just look at like, okay, are we consistently losing out in these specific phases of the project? Usually it's that sales to PM handover, right? So if you're like, okay, well, what should our goals be for the next year? Like operationalize and make efficient your sales process and your delivery process. And if you can figure out those ways like of assessing that and coming up with your OKRs so that you can actually achieve them. It's like assign the big rocks so that each person on the team has like at least a rock, like an initiative that they're responsible for. And so it's like, okay, so let's say it'd be like, just because we talked about it, improvement of your statement of work, the way that it's written and the clarity of that. Get a person to own that, and then actually have them sit down with the team and plan. Well, what is that going to look like? And then how will I know that I have successfully helped us to facilitate the meeting of that? So anytime you're dealing with like an economic climate like this, it's like looking at like efficiency and looking at opportunities for recurring revenue with existing clients. Where can we see the biggest wins? And
Yeah.
that is like honestly where I would say spend the most time, because you cannot do everything. I think I
Yeah.
read like if you have 7 OKRs, you'll probably do like 2 of them. If you have 5, you might do 3 of them. If you have 3, you'll probably do all 3.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds right. The one thing I'll add to that is like I've been having clients do this exercise of like, let's sit down, map out the work that we know, like do a bottoms up sales forecast.
Yeah.
What do we know we're gonna have? What can we reasonably rely on revenue next year? And then look back to see how much of my revenue from the last year or 2 years is that reoccurring or that existing
Totally.
from existing logos, how many is from new logos, and then go to your account manager or your business development person and say, here's where we want to grow new revenue. Here's your target. And here's the organic existing logo growth and what that
Love it.
target is. So that's where I've been focusing a lot of my conversations over the last couple of weeks as we start to plan for what 2025 looks like try to map out what the knowns, because there are so many unknowns. So if we just have a plan of like, okay, here's what we think is likely to happen, it'll help frame those conversations about bringing on new team members or thinking about changes on the team. So
Totally. Hey, Meredith, what's your take on like stripping out or cutting out clients that the revenue is so low that it's actually like it might have gotten taken on because it was like it was like we need the project, we need the revenue, but really in actual fact, all projects take a minimum amount of work to set up and run. That work that you put in to set up and run it often doesn't even equate to profitability when it comes down to it. What's your take on stripping out small clients?
yeah, I mean, the answer is you probably shouldn't be doing that work, but like there's
Yeah.
and practicality, there's so much emotion tied to the why behind. Maybe it's a
Yeah.
long-standing relationship, or it's if
Your
we take all.
cousin.
Yeah, there's so many like you just don't know the whys, but yes,
Yeah.
we shouldn't be doing that work, and we need to either bring in work that is worth our time and energy,
Yeah.
and align. Now, sometimes it's passion projects and we're doing those, we're taking it at a loss. And I always say that that's okay to do as long as we're making a conscious decision to take work on and we know like what that target margin is. Like we know like we're
Yeah.
gonna make 10% on it. Okay, fine, but like let's understand how many passion projects or portfolio projects that we're doing and our overall client portfolio, and like let's just set a maximum of like, okay,
Yeah.
here's what we're okay with doing. Great,
Yeah.
fine. But like as long as we're making that conscious decision and it's not just like happening to us.
Yeah. I absolutely agree with you. And I love the idea too, like I don't know how many agencies will involve their teams in this process, but like when you think about it, you hire your teammates because they're experts at what they do. And especially folks that are in creative and strategy, it's like, well, what about what we're doing? Like, I think I read Barrel's newsletter. They're like team out of New York City. They have an excellent
Yes.
newsletter. Peter
Yes.
King's like so on point. But they are so good about like practicing and improving on stuff that they try out, and the team is always contributing to like what are the ways that we're going to make like this continuous improvement in this area. And I love that they're involving that, because like, oh, I totally can't remember who said this, but it's like, okay, level one agencies, they're good at what they do. Level two agencies are good at what they do, and they're good at how they do it, the process and the operations piece. And the level three agencies are excellent at what they do, how they do it, but they also become this like legacy to how other agencies could run their businesses, and they like drive the direction of the agency space in the industry. It's like the leaders of the industry, and like that is beautiful power, right?
Yeah.
So I think us like opening up those channels and seeing what our people can provide in terms of like great ideas is tapping something that you have literally right at your fingertips.
Yeah. I love that. Awesome. Do we want to circle back? I know I think we half answered one of the
Yeah,
questions.
I know I got fired up and then I was like, wait. Okay, so can you remind me what the question was? I think it's about categories of and like what to time track. Can you just remind me of the question?
Yes, so the question we were talking about was what are time tracking best practices for PMs? There's a lot of context switching and it feels like a lot of effort to track time towards each specific client.
I know. Okay, so this is really tough because like I'm assuming that the question means like time tracking for PMs by PMs, like them tracking their own time. I hope that's the clarity of the question, not necessarily PMs asking about the team tracking their time. But yes, there's so much task switching, right? So like first of all, nobody should be, in my opinion, nobody should be tracking things down to like okay, the minute, and we're not rounding. Like if you're going to be rounding, I always say like try to round up, and I don't know, Meredith, if you have best practices on this, but I'm like minimum like half an hour to an hour if you can, because buffer is so key, right, in terms of how you're planning your day. So what do you have like a best practice for like amount of time rounding?
I usually just have people I like the timer. We use Harvest a lot. We use Harvest a lot across the
You're
board.
down to the
I just
minute.
say, just turn the timer on, let it go. But like what I do is I round to, but I came from public accounting. So I come from like rounded to the 15-minute mark.
Right, exactly. So like, yeah, 15 minute to 30-minute roundup is like you're still going to be building your buffer, because the chances are is like you've been thinking about it in the shower anyways, and so you might as well like
Yeah.
include, right, a lot of that time. But yeah, so I think this comes back to, okay, so this comes back to a little bit or more around that like time blocking. Even though a PM feels like their role is often very reactive. Oh, I have to check my inbox. I have to check that Slack message. It's all incoming. Someone, I cannot remember who said this, but it was beautiful. And they're like, you know what? Everything in your inbox, anything in Slack, anything in LinkedIn, any message notifications, that is not your to-do list. You make your to-do list, you write it down, and that is your commitment to what you need to do. Everything else is other people's priorities. Now, that doesn't mean that other people's priorities don't become your priorities, but you get to decide when and how. And so part of the proactive nature of a PM is then time blocking and bucketing when you're going to be dealing with different clients, so that you aren't like going, okay, I spent 5 minutes with this client, then I switched over to this client because of this meeting. You get to be in charge with your team of getting synchronous or asynchronous blocked meetings that have a cadence, that are book like things with like things. If you have client A work that you're doing, then block client A for Monday mornings or Tuesday afternoons or whatever. So that's going to make it a little more easy to track time. But I still would say, like, for a PM's time, the whole thing there is like you're trying to get a sense of, was the 20 to 30% allocation, minimum 15% allocation of PM budget enough for the project? Really, right? You're trying to say, where did I spend my time, and did I have enough time? Again, Meredith, you may disagree. I still think you can look at a day's worth of work and you can be like, okay, roughly, did you have enough time to do the work for each of the clients that you worked on today? And if not, how much more time would you need? And could you consider adjusting in the future if you have another sales cycle or phase that you can work on to get to that healthy margin? Because
Yep.
it's just it's so I'm trying to think of the word diminutive, or like it just gets into these like tiny pieces of time that like we're just we're just making it up at that point. By the end of the week,
Yeah.
we're like, I don't know, it's 2 minutes here and like 7 there. It's not even
Yeah,
real.
no, that doesn't matter. It's more of just like, the reason I said the timer is because then you don't forget on Friday to
Yeah.
track today's time.
If
It's like,
it's there and it's active, that's great.
yeah, fine. But yeah, no,
Yeah.
we just need, again, it's just the data to help us make decisions. It's not punitive.
Yeah.
That's the biggest thing. And then like we got to time. I'm a big time tracking. Got to time track. We need the data to make decisions for the future.
It makes sense. It makes sense completely. I think the data is always great, and you should use it. And if you don't use it, then don't track it because
Yes,
it's like it's a waste
I
of
agree
your
with
time.
that. I agree
Yeah.
with that.
Yeah, exactly. So I hope that helps to answer the question. In terms of categorizations, like do you have like recommendations in terms of how you categorize time blocking? Because we have some, but like it
I
depends on what type of work you do.
I don't, as long as it's to the project, if you're working on like, one client with lots of different projects. So as long as
Yeah.
it's like the client, and I don't even get like tough with people when they don't track internal time, like fine, I don't necessarily need you to. I think there are reasons for it, but
Yeah.
I just want to see billable client time. And if that's all to the same task, like we're not using it for anything else. Now, if your organization wants to use that and understand like what
Yeah.
specific tasks, like how, what, or like phases. I've got one client that tracks time based on the phase of project.
Right.
That's helpful for the biz dev team to go back then and look, okay, where were we at in the different
Yeah.
phases? So it's
Yeah.
all like we don't track things for the sake of tracking if we're going to use that data and then yeah.
It's exactly. That's what I would say too. It's like if you want to track, it's like you need data so you know for data. Canadian thing. I don't know. If you want to know like which role should be getting more budget to work on things, or are you consistently going over in specific areas? Yes, it's very helpful for those kinds of classifications. And then it is great to know like, do you have enough time per phase? Is that actually happening? Because what I see, like, I mean, as you can imagine, you get into like your design development phases if you're into like that area of business, and you're like looking at like shortcutting on things like QA, like constantly, right? Instead of allocating separate budget for it, it's like, okay, it
Mhm.
got eaten up now. And it's like, well, we didn't renegotiate because this is not real now. We're not actually working within a real time frame. So we have to have hard conversations sooner.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
they're not actually that hard. That's the thing. It's like you think they're gonna be hard, but it's way harder when you're like, oh, we ate it. And now I have all this pressure to like try and make it up, That's
Yeah.
harder.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Totally agree. All right. Any other questions floating out there that we should hit on, Caroline, or do we?
Yeah, I think we hit them all for now. If you do have more questions that we didn't have time to get to, feel free to email them to me, Caroline@upsourcedaccounting.com, and we'll be sure to address it on the next one. We do this every third Thursday of the month at 2 p.m. I will let you guys tell everybody how to find you outside of this. Thank you for coming.
Thanks. Rachel, do you want to shout out where to
Yeah.
find you and the team?
Yeah, if anyone's looking for more firecracker responses about things you care about, come to the site louderthan10.com. You can also email me, Rachel@louderthan10.com. I'm probably like of all the social media because I gave up on Twitter. I don't even know what they're calling it now, X, whatever. LinkedIn's probably the best way to get in touch, but like email, I would say is great. I'm happy to do a strategy session with you. Call me if there's like a project management, operational, or even like financial literacy problem that you're having. We can just take a look at where you're at, where you're headed. And like Louder Than 10 really wants to support the sustainability of small to mid-sized agencies as this like economic climate is shifting. We want workers to be able to get paid what they're worth, to feel satisfied at their jobs. And we truly believe like we fight to death for democracy in our governments and in our worlds, and then we settle for dictatorships at work. So what would it look like if we could actually have democracy at work?
I love that. Awesome.
Thanks.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate your time, and this was
Same.
awesome.
It was really
Fun.
great to catch up. I
It was.
love a good spirited talk. So
Me too.
yeah.